The alien fleet descended upon Earth with a confidence born from countless conquests across the galaxy. They were the Trinovians, a technologically superior race that had never known defeat. Their ships sliced through the atmosphere, sleek and silent, as they made their way to the planet's surface. Earth had been classified as a death world, an unpredictable planet teeming with dangers. But the Trinovians saw this as just another challenge to overcome. They had invaded harsher worlds before, or so they believed. Commander Rauner, leader of the invasion force, observed the planet's surface with a cold, calculating gaze. He had chosen America as their entry point, a vast continent with varied landscapes, believing it would provide a suitable staging ground for their operations. As the first wave of drop pods landed in a remote, forested area, Rauner felt a surge of pride. This world, despite its reputation, would soon fall like all the others. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. As the Trinovian soldiers disembarked, the dense humidity clung to their suits, fogging their visors and causing their breathing apparatuses to malfunction. The air was thick with moisture, a far cry from the controlled environments they were accustomed to. Within minutes, the pristine forest they had landed in turned from an idyllic backdrop to a labyrinth of suffocating heat and tangled undergrowth. Rauner's second-in-command, Lieutenant Zorvin, reported in with growing concern. "Commander, the atmosphere is affecting our equipment. The humidity is higher than anticipated, and the plant life, it's aggressive." Rauner dismissed the concerns with a wave of his hand. "Adapt, Lieutenant. We are Trinovians. A few plants and moisture will not deter us." But as they pushed deeper into the forest, it became clear that this was no ordinary landscape. The trees were enormous, their roots twisting and rising like serpents from the ground, creating treacherous obstacles. Strange, spiny plants exuded a sticky sap that clogged their machinery, and every step was accompanied by the unsettling sensation of being watched. The first casualty came without warning. A soldier, scouting ahead, was ensnared by a big snake, dragging him into the underbrush before he could even scream. The squad tried to follow, but the vegetation was too thick, too unyielding. His life signs flickered and then vanished from their monitors. There was no time to mourn. "Commander, we've lost one of our own." Zorvin's voice was edged with a fear he had never known before. Rauner gritted his teeth, unwilling to show any sign of weakness. "This world is merely testing us. Press on." Yet, the force continued to fight back. As they advanced, they encountered a series of natural traps. Hidden sinkholes that swallowed whole squads, venomous creatures that struck from the shadows, and a relentless barrage of rain that turned the ground into a quagmire. Their advanced technology, once thought invincible, was rendered nearly useless in the face of such primal hostility. The realization dawned slowly, creeping into the minds of the Trinovians like the dampness that seeped into their suits. Earth was not just a death world. It was a living entity, fighting tooth and nail against their intrusion. And in this remote corner of America, the land itself seemed to rise against them, defying their every attempt to conquer it. As night fell and the forest came alive with the eerie sounds of creatures they could not see, Rauner was forced to reconsider. Perhaps this invasion would not be as straightforward as they had anticipated. The darkness closed in around them, thick with the promise of more dangers to come. The commander, usually so sure of victory, felt a rare pang of doubt. But it was too late to turn back now. "We continue at dawn," he ordered, though his voice lacked the conviction it once had. The forest remained silent, but Rauner could feel its presence, a lurking, malevolent force. And as the Trinovians settled in for a restless night, it was clear that the true battle was only just beginning. At first light, the Trinovians resumed their march, but the forest seemed to have grown overnight. The undergrowth, already dense, now threatened to overtake their path entirely. Commander Rauner urged his troops forward, but a sense of unease had taken hold. The once confident invaders now found themselves on the defensive, battling not just the planet, but their own growing fear. As they emerged from the oppressive forest, they encountered a new obstacle, a vast, arid desert that stretched out before them like a scorched sea. The transition was jarring. One moment, they were surrounded by suffocating greenery. The next, they were exposed to an endless expanse of blistering sand. The desert was a stark contrast to the forest, yet it proved no less hostile. The sun, magnified by the atmosphere, beat down on the soldiers with relentless intensity. Their suits, designed for a range of environments, struggled to regulate their body temperatures. The sand, fine as powder, infiltrated every crevice of their gear, grinding their advanced machinery to a halt. What was meant to be a quick march across the desert became a grueling ordeal as the heat drained their energy and sapped their morale. "Commander, our progress is too slow," Lieutenant Zorvin reported, his voice crackling through the static of the communication system. "The troops are exhausted and our equipment is failing." Rauner's face hardened. "We cannot afford to stop. We must reach the other side before nightfall. This desert is no different from the countless others we've crossed. But the desert, like the forest before it, had its own ways of resisting the invaders. As the day wore on, the Trinovians found themselves caught in a sandstorm that erupted without warning. The winds howled like a living creature, flinging sharp grains of sand into their visors, reducing visibility to mere inches. The once orderly ranks of soldiers dissolved into chaos as they struggled to stay together in the face of the storm. Amid the swirling sands, they encountered another bizarre phenomenon: sudden, intense heat waves that distorted the air and sent temperatures soaring. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, creating treacherous dunes that swallowed up equipment and soldiers alike. Each step became a battle against the elements, their once precise formation now a haphazard line of stragglers. "Commander, the desert is alive," Zorvin murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. "It's as if it knows we are here and wants to drive us out." Rauner clenched his fists, unwilling to give in to such superstitions. But he couldn't deny the evidence before him. The desert was not merely a stretch of barren land. It was a relentless adversary, and it was winning. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Trinovians finally reached the edge of the desert. But the victory was hollow. They had lost nearly half their force, swallowed by the sand or fallen to the unforgiving heat. Those who survived were battered, their once pristine armor caked with sand and their spirits broken. Before them lay the next challenge, a range of jagged mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist. The sight of them only deepened the soldiers' despair. These mountains, with their sharp cliffs and hidden dangers, promised to be just as unforgiving as the desert. Rauner looked up at the towering peaks, his determination faltering for the first time. This was not the swift conquest he had envisioned. America, with its unpredictable and varied landscapes, was proving to be an opponent unlike any they had faced before. "We rest here tonight," he announced, though the decision felt more like a concession than a command. "At dawn, we conquer those mountains." But as the exhausted soldiers set up camp, the looming peaks seemed to mock their efforts. The Trinovians might have survived the forest and the desert, but the mountains stood as a silent reminder that the worst was yet to come. And in the back of Rauner's mind, a seed of doubt began to grow. Would they ever see the end of this hostile land? As dawn broke over the jagged mountains, Commander Rauner rallied his remaining troops for the climb. The Trinovians, wearied by the unforgiving terrain they had crossed, now faced a daunting ascent. The mountains loomed above them, their peaks hidden in clouds that promised more treachery. Yet, Rauner pressed on, unwilling to let the land defeat them. But it wasn't the mountains that posed the greatest threat. It was what awaited them beyond. Halfway up the ascent, the first attack came. It was subtle at first, a series of distant cracks that echoed through the valleys. The Trinovians paused, their senses on high alert, scanning the cliffs for any sign of movement. Then, without warning, rocks began to tumble down the slopes, triggered by expertly placed explosives. The avalanche of stone caught the invaders off guard, crushing those too slow to react and forcing the rest to scatter. "Commander, we're under attack," Lieutenant Zorvin shouted, his voice tight with urgency. Rauner cursed under his breath. He had expected to battle the elements, but not human resistance, especially not this far from civilization. Yet, the ambush was undeniable, and it was clear that these humans were not the primitive beings the Trinovians had dismissed. These were fighters, hardened by their environment and using the terrain to their advantage. The Trinovians regrouped, but the humans did not give them time to recover. From the cliffs above, a volley of gunfire erupted, targeting the exposed alien troops. The humans were hidden among the rocks, their camouflage blending seamlessly with the landscape. Their tactics were swift and brutal, striking from cover and disappearing before the Trinovians could retaliate. Rauner barked orders, directing his troops to return fire, but their advanced weapons, designed for open warfare, were ill-suited to this guerrilla assault. The humans were ghosts in the mountains, appearing and disappearing with deadly precision. The Trinovians' frustration grew as their numbers dwindled, their technology proving ineffective against the raw determination of the human fighters. The commander's confidence, once unshakable, now wavered as he realized the full extent of the threat they faced. These humans were unlike any enemy they had encountered. They did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought for survival, and that made them dangerous in ways the Trinovians had not anticipated. Zorvin, struggling to maintain order among the increasingly demoralized troops, approached Rauner with grim news. "Commander, we've lost contact with the rear guard. The humans have cut off our retreat." Rauner's eyes narrowed. "Then we push forward. We will break through this ambush and regroup on the other side of the mountains." But the mountains had other plans. As they advanced, the terrain became even more treacherous, with narrow paths that crumbled beneath their feet and sheer cliffs that offered no protection from the human sharpshooters above. Every step forward was paid for in blood, and every victory felt hollow as their numbers continued to dwindle. The human resistance was relentless. They fought with a tenacity that bordered on madness, their knowledge of the terrain giving them a deadly edge. They exploited every weakness, using the mountains as both weapon and shield. For every Trinovian that fell, it seemed another human took their place, undeterred by the advanced alien technology that had once inspired fear. As the day wore on and the Trinovians were pushed to their breaking point, Rauner finally understood the true nature of their enemy. These humans were not just defending their land. They were defending their very way of life. The mountains, the desert, the forests, these were not just obstacles to be overcome. They were allies to the humans, shaping them into warriors who could not be easily defeated. By nightfall, the Trinovians had managed to escape the ambush, but at a devastating cost. Their forces were decimated and their morale shattered. As they reached the other side of the mountains, the survivors were haunted by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. They had underestimated the humans, and now they faced an enemy who would stop at nothing to protect their home. Rauner, once so certain of victory, could no longer deny the truth. America was not just a land of extremes. It was a fortress, defended by a people who refused to yield. And the Trinovians, for all their superiority, had walked straight into a war they were unprepared to fight. The realization struck Commander Rauner with the force of a physical blow. This invasion was lost. The mountains, with their treacherous paths and hidden human adversaries, had become an insurmountable barrier. The once proud Trinovian forces were now a shadow of their former selves, reduced to scattered units desperately trying to regroup and survive. Every attempt to push forward had been met with devastating counterattacks. The humans were not just defending their land. They were dismantling the invaders piece by piece. Rauner stood on a rocky outcrop, surveying the remnants of his once mighty army. The once pristine landscape was now scarred by battle, littered with the wreckage of Trinovian technology and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The humans, relentless in their pursuit, showed no sign of mercy. Even now, he could hear the distant crack of gunfire and the faint echoes of explosions as his forces continued to be driven back. "We can't hold this position any longer," Zorvin reported grimly, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Our forces are too scattered, our equipment is failing, And the humans, they're everywhere. Rauner nodded, the weight of defeat settling heavily on his shoulders. We have no choice. Order the retreat. Get as many as you can to the dropships. We must leave this cursed planet. The command to retreat rippled through the ranks, and what was left of the Trinovian forces began their hasty withdrawal. The once orderly invasion had devolved into a desperate scramble for survival. The humans, sensing their enemy's desperation, pressed the attack, harrying the retreating aliens every step of the way. The Trinovians, who had once believed themselves invincible, were now fleeing, their advanced technology proving no match for the humans' intimate knowledge of the land and their unyielding resolve. As the drop ships began to take off, Rauner lingered at the edge of the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of failure. The realization that he had underestimated not just the planet, but its people, gnawed at him. This was not just a defeat. It was a lesson, one paid for with the lives of his soldiers. As the last of the ships ascended into the sky, Rauner allowed himself a final glance at the land below. The mountains, the forests, the deserts, each had played a part in the downfall of his forces. But more than the land, it was the humans who had truly defeated him. Their resilience, their adaptability, and their unwavering determination had proven to be the most formidable weapon of all. In the cold, sterile confines of his ship, Rauner retreated to his quarters, seeking solace in solitude. He sat in silence, replaying the events of the invasion in his mind. How could a species so seemingly primitive, on a planet so wild and untamed, have bested the Trinovians? It was a question that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Zorvin entered quietly, his own face lined with the burden of defeat. "We've made it out, Commander. But at what cost?" Rauner didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared out into the void of space, his mind still anchored to the planet they had left behind. "We underestimated them," he finally said, his voice low and measured. "Earth is not just a death world. It's a world forged by the struggle of its people. And America, it is a crucible shaping those who survive into something more, something unstoppable." Zorvin nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the lesson they had learned too late. "What will you tell a High Council?" Rauner's expression hardened, a mix of regret and grim determination. "The truth, that Earth is beyond our reach, and that the humans, they are not to be trifled with." As the ship sped away from Earth, leaving the blue-green world behind, Rauner knew one thing for certain. The Trinovians would never return. The cost of this invasion was too high, the price of their arrogance too steep. And somewhere deep within, he felt a grudging respect for the people of this planet, a respect born from the bitter taste of defeat.